So yeah, if you are not familiar with the Curious Case of Benjamin Button, it is actually a really really cool movie. But the Curious Case of Sephiroth, it for some reason seems to be a reference to the movie, which actually got me very interested in the video itself. So we're gonna watch it today. I think we're good. All right, let's start watching. I love Sephiroth so much. Do you know what? Like, okay, before we even start the video, I should probably bring up a very curious comment that I received yesterday in one of my YouTube videos, and I think we were talking about the about Star Wars villains in general, and there was a person who wrote me like a huge paragraph basically explaining to me how I have no right to enjoy villains whatsoever because they're, I don't know, psychopaths, sociopaths, or whatever. And basically, them asking me what possesses me into even enjoying villains in the stories. And my point overall was that the best villains, in my opinion, create the best stories, and that just because you enjoy the villain, the way he's written, his backstory and whatnot, doesn't necessarily have to mean that you enjoy his misdeeds. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've been really upset about that, and that's the point that I've been trying to make. Anyways, I hope you enjoy Sephiroth as much as I do. And colds are mean, right? He's so nice.
It's no exaggeration to say that Sephiroth has become one of the most iconic video game characters
Thank you. I
of all
appreciate
time.
that.
Ever since appearing in Final Fantasy VII back in 1997, the demure, silver haired antagonist has become a symbol of not just that particular game, but also the franchise as a whole. From the striking and elegant design, through to the unparalleled strength, unorthodox and overcompensating weapon, and sinister yet calm and calculating
Overcompensating.
demeanor,
Oh my
there was
god.
just something about the combination of elements that struck a chord in a way that had seldom been seen within video games before.
I think that there, like, in my head there was like a team of pretty much scientists and psychologists when they were coming up with Sephiroth as a villain to make him the most badass and likable villain ever. It's like there's not a lot of villains whose I don't know, 30-inch statue you could sell on like day one of a pre-order of a game. He's just like, I feel he is hot. He is like, I don't know, like it's amazing. The writing, the character crafting and everything that they did to just like kind of embed Sephiroth into the story and make him pretty much the main character. Because yes, Cloud is the main character, but we're all there for Sephiroth. And this just contradicts what that person on my YouTube channel said completely. He basically is against the theory that the best villains make the best stories. I really, really believe this. By the way, we might have an ad in 1 minute and 30 seconds. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. Vincent, but evil and with fabulous hair. See, unfortunately, I never really got to experience Vincent because when I was playing through Final Fantasy VII Original, I didn't really unlock Vincent, so I completely missed out on his lore, and I'm so sad about it. Also, Amon, welcome back. Sorry for not greeting you earlier. How are you? Correctly, the company he works for builds his shampoo specifically for him. I saw honestly, I saw someone's meme on Twitter. Like it was like a little print screen of Sephiroth from that newest Final Fantasy VII reboot trailer, and he was standing like this, and it was like they kind of made it into like a shampoo commercial. I thought that was amazing.
That's not to say there hadn't been good antagonists produced
Yeah,
throughout the 80s
unfortunately,
and
they're
90s,
missable.
as Dr. Robotnik,
I
Bowser,
almost
and
missed Yuffie
Ganondorf
too.
served as fantastic, prominent examples for a variety of reasons. But Sephiroth was just different. It's been revealed by the developers of Final Fantasy VII that Sephiroth was always intended to be the game's main antagonist. But that statement only tells half the story.
Exactly.
Despite having a clear vision for who Sephiroth was and what he should represent within the game itself, significant changes were made to his backstory throughout the game's development cycle. One of the core facets would be that the game would evolve.
Like, honestly, I hope that they're gonna actually go into the depths of how it's different, like how Sephiroth is different now in comparison to what they wanted for him, because it does feel like he was supposed to be the main character of the story. Speaking of shampoo, Sephiroth uses a whole bottle every day, right? Like, that's one of the first sponsorships he should accept
Around Cloud Strife
if he ever wants
undergoing a
to.
desperate pursuit of Sephiroth. Unlike previous games, this meant Sephiroth would need to have a consistent and dominating presence throughout, and there was a belief that by making this change, the final battle would serve as a much more fitting climax to the game. They were right.
Oh my god, I don't know if any of you were here when I was doing this final battle of Final Fantasy VII original. And I at that time I was struggling so hard with the final battle, and I barely beat like the first stage of Sephiroth, and I did not know about the save for Sephiroth. So what happened to me is I was sitting there and already like celebrating the win and the end of the game or whatever, and then a new boss appears, whereas my party is crippled. I'm like out of potions, I'm out of pretty much everything, half of them are dead, and I'm like, woo, we won. But then the boss appears and I'm like, oh my god, what am I supposed to do? It was so bad. It took me like another 2 days of grinding and just level pumping pretty much to get ready, both in game and emotionally, for this to happen.
As the game
It was so
progressed,
bad.
numerous elements would be used to demonize Sephiroth. This started with the blood-strewn corridors of the Shinra headquarters and the uncomfortable murder of President Shinra, and was cemented by the Nibelheim flashback, which showed Sephiroth burn the entire town to the ground and cut down its residents.
And isn't it weird how we still didn't up hating Sephiroth after that? Like, he's just one of those villains that is a giant red flag, but you still somehow can't find it in you to hate him.
Without mercy. Sephiroth would again be painted as a heartless killer following the death of Aerith, something that served as such an effective and shocking narrative moment that it has since become
Even
one of the most
this.
iconic deaths in video game history. But what's interesting is that Sephiroth, as an individual, was seldom seen throughout much of the game.
It's like, yes, Sephiroth. This is what they're right about. Sephiroth is more talked about than actually seen, but I think that actually builds that momentum for when he actually shows up in the game, and it's always glorious. No person who still hates him with passion. Like, yes, the truly, like lawful good people will absolutely have a lot of hate for Sephiroth. I've never categorized myself as a true good or lawful good or whatever, so I don't have it in me to hate him, because I am just hopelessly, I don't know, attracted to red flag people, and Sephiroth is just a walking red flag that I can't find it in me to hate.
It was unclear in the original English localization, but both the murders of President Shinra and Aerith were carried out by Jenova as opposed to Sephiroth, and the Nibelheim flashback had happened some 5 years prior. Sephiroth would not be seen, in the flesh at least, until the Whirlwind Maze. This was over halfway through the game, but due to how the story was constructed, Sephiroth was always there as a looming presence. And this was in part due to a masterful piece of directorial.
Yeah, I've already played Crisis Core. I played Crisis Core Reunion, and it is to this day one of my most favorite beloved games. And I was honestly, I didn't even know if I would be playing the game or not. Like, back then I was struggling with money a little bit, but I really wanted to play the game, and I applied for sponsorship by Square Enix, and they were very, very kind to me and have gifted me the game at launch, which was like, for me, that was like one of my biggest moments. Was it last year? It was last year. Yes, it was at the end of last year, and it was I was so excited. And I remember that was my one of my longest streams that I've ever had, just playing one game. I spent like 10 or 11 hours just going through the game and then finishing it pretty much within the weekend. It was crazy. It was such an experience for me. I love Crisis Core.
Or decision making by Yoshinori Kitase. Prior to joining Square, Kitase had been a keen student of film. This manifested through his teenage years after watching countless movies alongside his father, and it led to an interest in not just the movies themselves, but how they were made. Kitase would end up enrolling at the Nihon University College of Art, where he studied screenwriting and filmmaking. And after being encouraged by one of his teachers that animation was a viable and smart way to express what he had learnt, Kitase would end up joining a small
Is it correct that the only company you work for in the game industry is Square Enix? I was in an animation studio for a year before I came here, and that's it. That's on honestly, that is so rare and so impressive for today's day and age. I guess it would be almost impossible because as someone who's been trying to kind of get into the gaming industry, those doors are so hard to find because you literally go chasing around, and as a person who's entering the industry, you are pretty lucky even if you get like a position of like an intern or like a QA tester or customer support or something like that. It's like this is kind of where you start, I guess, unless you get just crazy lucky to have some transferable skills to get yourself on a higher position, which is what I'm trying to do right now. But honestly, I really admire this.
animation studio after graduating, where he worked as an animator and animation planner. However, after less than a year in this position, Kitase quit. There was an overriding feeling that storytelling within that medium just
Says how did you get involved at Square? I entered the company in 1990, which is right about when we were moving from Nintendo to Super Nintendo. Obviously, the graphics weren't anywhere near where they are today, but when I started thinking that I wanted to move from the animation world into the games, I really wanted to go somewhere that had a very strong emphasis on storylines, which is why I was interested in joining Square. And honestly, it was the right decision to get a position within the gaming industry, I need to start on an indie level and showcase your stuff. Yeah, that's correct. Or like I said, just have some transferable skills. Like right now, I have really good skills and just proof of like consistent and good work as a social media specialist. And what I'm trying to do is basically get myself into the industry with those skills, and that's kind of currently what I'm working on. So I understand how hard it is. Like if you have no skills whatsoever, you have to literally get lucky enough to get hired by an indie studio these days. But even that is really hard these days because of all the like, for example, all the layoffs that have happened recently. It's like you want to get into the gaming industry these days, it's going to be so difficult because of all these talented, pretty much senior people as well, having all these skills that are maybe on a higher level than yours. Even though you're good, you might not be at that level just yet, and it's just very hard to get a job right now.
didn't resonate with his own creative interests, and so he decided to try video games instead. Around that time, Square were fortunately looking for individuals who had a better understanding of how cinematic presentations could enhance their storytelling. And after working on the initial entry into the Mana franchise and then Romancing Saga, Kitase was elevated to working alongside Sakaguchi on the scenario of Final Fantasy V. From this point forward, Kitase brought a whole
Nice.
new array of expression to how Final Fantasy scenarios were conveyed on screen. But when it came to Final Fantasy VII, his knowledge of film made this extend far beyond the directing of specific scenes through the smart use of animations and musical transitions. Instead, he used a specific point of reference to help shape how Sephiroth would be perceived throughout the entire game, and that point of reference was Jaws.
FF5 story was average. His best FF6s were the story piece. Like as someone who has never played FF5 and FF6, I'm definitely more enticed, I guess, to play Final Fantasy VI. Mostly because of like pretty much everyone within the community, just talking about how amazing and how great the game is. but at the same time, it's not just about that. It is also about the music. And having recently come back from the Distant World concert, like listening to these Final Fantasy VI tracks, it just makes me so curious about the game itself, and I just kind of want to go and experience it for myself. And I'm just very very excited about that. By the way, if you would like to support me as a content creator absolutely for free, this weekend I am doing the Raid Shadow Legends sponsorship, which you can see there on the screen. And you can download the game for free, play for a few hours, and basically help support me. And who knows, maybe even end up liking the game as well. So thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring today's stream. And yes, please do help me. I
That
want this to
particular
go well.
film went beyond simply relying on the underlying fears people had around sharks. And by using cinematic techniques, Steven Spielberg and his team were able to increase the effectiveness of Jaws as an antagonist. These techniques related to music, camera work, and
Oh,
screen
I
time.
didn't know that.
John Williams
Huh.
was tasked with creating an ominous and simple theme that would create tension and signaled impending danger. Specific camera angles and set piece shots were then used to glorify the handiwork of Jaws without actually showing Jaws. And these elements then dovetailed with
That's
Jaws
cool.
having seldom appeared on the screen for significant portions of the film. When combined, it stoked the imagination and left audiences with gaps that needed to be filled. And, as is often the case in such scenarios, imaginations ran wild with possibilities, making for quite the payoff when Jaws did finally appear. These same techniques were applied to Sephiroth.
Now that I think about it, it's so
Nobuo
impressive.
Uematsu composed simple, ominous themes that the player could associate with Sephiroth. Specific set-piece moments were used throughout the game as a way of highlighting Sephiroth's superiority, and as mentioned, screen time was kept to an absolute minimum. This would see the player only encounter the real Sephiroth twice throughout the entire game.
Right.
Once at the
Wow.
Whirlwind Maze,
Now
where
that
he
I
was
think
encased
about
in
it.
a Mako crystal, and once at the game's conclusion inside the Northern Crater. Everything else, from Genova's shapeshifting appearances through to the flashbacks and visions, were there to build a presence and an aura, and this would make the final showdown against Sephiroth all the more impactful and climactic. For many years after the game's initial release, based on all of this, the legacy of Sephiroth would continue to grow. In the initial sense, that growth happened in the same way it had for other villains, like Kefka. But then, on the 1st of April,
Wait, Kafka is from, I want to say Final Fantasy 9 or no. Because I haven't played 9, I haven't played 6, I haven't played any of these games, and people are telling me that as a person who enjoys villains, that I should definitely go and play the game with Kafka. That is 9, right? 6? Oh shit. Okay then. Um, apparently, I don't know who said it to me. I think it was either Lunet or someone else, that it is one of the best villains pretty much ever created within Final Fantasy. Or was it about 9? I don't know. I'm mixing up 9 and 6 because I don't know anything about them, but soon enough I will.
2003, Square merged with Enix, and everything changed. In the preceding year, Yuichi Wada
Yeah,
had
I
used
don't
his
know
business nous to
about
turn
the
around
9
Square's ailing
villain.
fortunes. They had suffered blow after financial blow, and after churning through CEOs, Wada was able to come in, steady the sinking ship, and within just 1 year post the best operating margin in the company's history up until that point. This had been achieved by adopting a very simple.
In the early 2000s, as Takachi and Sakuchi left Square and others, including the new president Hiroshi Wada, took over, Square wasn't only changing behind the scenes, it was also changing its output as Final Fantasy shifted from a franchise with one new sequel every couple of years to a franchise with multiple branches and spin off titles releasing more frequently. Like, from a business standpoint, this was good. I personally am not a fan of how many phone games they had that you literally can't even play today anymore. And it's just sad sees that there are some really crucial storylines, kind of like Vincent's storyline. From my knowledge, he like his story is told in one of those phone games, Soldier something. I don't know what it's called, but apparently that's I don't know, that's like a big lore point that I wish personally I had, known, and maybe I would have appreciated Vincent a lot more had I known these stories and whatnot. Like I wish they would keep to even the PlayStation's exclusives aren't that bad because most people who play Final Fantasy, I can't say most people have a PlayStation, but at the time, PlayStation, I guess 1, 2, 3, or whatever, that's where you would play those Final Fantasy games. And I guess most of the people back in the day would have the PlayStation, like at least the Final Fantasy fans, is what I'm trying to say.
Business approach, exploiting their current franchises in the most cost efficient way possible. It sounds nefarious, but the reality was that Square had been doing this for many years already. They had just done so in a much more controlled manner so as to not dilute their IP. Final Fantasy, for example, had often seen the lore of numerous games expanded through the production of books and animated movies, with merchandise then used to generate supplemental income.
Why
Adjacent
not?
video games were also produced, such as Final Fantasy Tactics and numerous games within the Chocobo sub-series, and re-releases were also approved so as to allow
You know that Kingdom Hearts had a mobile game whose lore predates the entire franchise, sadly defunct, but it was a fun experience. I didn't know that. And as someone who's gonna be playing Kingdom Hearts pretty soon, that kind of fills me with a lot of sadness. Because now I know that there's like this portion of the content that I will sadly never experience unless I watch it on YouTube, which is also an option. I guess all these stories are available through footage, but then I'm just like sitting there and basically watching a movie and not playing a game. That's sad.
newer gamers to gain access to earlier installments into the franchise. The only thing that was off limits was producing a video game that would serve as a spin off or sequel to an existing mainline
Aww.
numbered title, and this rule was put in place by Sakaguchi. The rule existed because Sakaguchi believed that their primary creative efforts should be placed on creating something new as opposed to something derivative. But after Sakaguchi left, the rule was quickly expunged, and Wada tasked the senior figures who still remained at the company, such as Kitase and Kawazu, with figuring out ways to maximize and exploit the prominent properties they had access to. As Kitase had overseen the two biggest commercial releases in the history of Square in Final Fantasy VII and X, creating expansions for those stories was the most obvious choice.
And it's not necessarily the right choice. At least when it comes to Final Fantasy X, I stand by this. This is what happened to me when I played Final Fantasy X. I enjoyed the game so much. I had such a good time going through the story, playing the game and everything. And then immediately after that, I started with Final Fantasy X too, which I guess admittedly wasn't the right choice because there was like a gap between Final Fantasy X and X 2. But at the same time, I had all these like fresh memories from 10. And then I started playing 10 too, and it took me ages to like bring myself to finish the game because of how much less I was enjoying it in comparison to like Final Fantasy X itself. And if only they had kept at least, somewhat of the same vibe, it would have, it like I don't understand creating a different product for the audience who's already enjoyed the initial product. It's like you're creating this for a Final Fantasy X fan base, and it was a huge risk, and some people really enjoyed it, especially the people who kind of resonated with that vibe. I personally did not. I don't like these like cheery vibes and whatnot, and that's why I had a hard time, I guess, connecting to to three of them. Like I was missing Lulu, who was just kind of like a that dark character that I really like. Final Fantasy tries to bring something new with each mainline game. With mainline, I'm fine with that because it's a new mainline game, it's a new story, it's a new experience, and it's fine. But I don't like it when they change the vibe of games that come after, with the exception of Final Fantasy XIV, obviously, because I believe that each expansion, which I see as a continuation of the main game, should have a different vibe. They can't all be Shadowbringers or Endwalker or whatever, Stormblood, Heavensward. They can't look alike because people will get bored. But when it comes to the other, these other games, this is pretty much what I'm feeling. I feel like each mainline game should be different, but the continuations of the games themselves should have a similar vibe. And this is the hill that I will die on. Hi, Ortiz. Welcome back. What's up? How are you?
They had such large and dedicated sub-communities, and the assumption was that there would be significant demand for supplemental content no matter what form it took. Final Fantasy X-2 would serve.
Yeah, Dawntrail may look like a summer vacation, but I bet there will be sad season depression. I don't. I think the trailer was very misleading when it comes to what the expansion is. You think that it's this happy holiday place or whatever, but I agree with you. I think that there is going to be a really good story behind that. It's like people don't know what they want. People want the chill games, but at the same time people want the games that will actually deeply hurt them, that's why people really enjoyed Shadowbringers and the ending of Endwalker and whatnot. Like, I think that people secretly just, like, especially gamers, right, RPG gamers, they want to be we want to be hurt by these games that we play, and it's a very odd and strange concept, but I feel like if you're not crying at the end of the game, your experience is kind of stolen from you. I don't know. Am I wrong?
As the first property released under this mindset, as Final Fantasy X was still front of mind. And it proved that the assertion was true. Over 5 million copies were sold, and this had been accomplished with only a fraction of the development budget of the original game. Behind the scenes, provisional planning was also underway for a brand new CG movie.
Good.
Keen to ensure the colossal failure that was The Spirits Within was not replicated, it too would be aligned with an existing property. Final Fantasy X was again suggested, as they could reuse some of the assets that appear within Final Fantasy X and X-2, and to further keep costs down, the initial plan was for it to only be 20 to 30 minutes in length. However, focus will be shifted to Final Fantasy VII.
Very true, finishing Persona 3 gave me depression for a couple of weeks. I'm sad that this amazing story ended, but also happy that I experienced something spectacular. This is what I'm talking about. It's like people remember mostly those games that kind of gave them I guess, I don't know, gave them sadsies. I think that's, I don't know why it is that we always expect to be sad. Like, at the same time, like, nobody wants to see their favorite characters die and whatnot, but like, I'm not just saying this as a content creator who obviously wants to experience the good endings of games because people will enjoy watching them. But at the same time, like, as a gamer, like, you want to remember these endings. I don't know how to explain that. You Convo, I'm so sorry if I'm butchering your name. Welcome. Tomorrow I'm going to open the time capsule I buried as a kid. I can't wait to see. Oh God. Jesus, what? I actually enjoyed the movie as long as I ignored the Final Fantasy connection or lack thereof. The movie, which one? About the. Wait, which one was there? There's the Final Fantasy 15 movie, and. Wait, is that the only one? There's also the Advent Children. Is that the one that we're talking about? Spirits Within or Advent Children, right? Spirits Within, I watched both of them, but I can't remember the actual title of Final Fantasy 15 movie. Is that the Spirits Within?
They felt it had greater global appeal,
the one we were talking
because
about.
The story left so many unanswered questions thanks to its ambiguous conclusion, it was ripe for expansion. With the project given the green light, Kitase tasked Kazushige.
See, I don't know if I've seen it. If Spirits Within is not the Final Fantasy 15, like the prequel, then I haven't seen it.
Nojima with drafting a plot. It would have a central focus around Cloud, Tifa, and the kids they were looking after. And at this stage, there was not even a mention of Sephiroth. After Tetsuya Nomura was then installed as the director of the project, wholesale changes were made. He felt the script was far too boring and needed more action. And it was
Boring.
this desire that would form the impetus for Sephiroth to
Final Fantasy
reappear
7?
during a dramatic action centerpiece that would reimagine the fated showdown from the original game. At the time, these aspirations were all conducted behind the scenes. But due to there being so much pressure on the project to turn a profit, a critical decision was taken. And this decision would forever change the way Sephiroth would be treated as an in-game narrative asset and as a marketing tool. It had not escaped Square Enix how popular Sephiroth had become. To ensure profitability, it would therefore make sense to use one of their most important assets for promotional purposes. From the outset, this
Like, I feel like with Sephiroth being used as a promotional material, they have to be very careful to not oversell him. Even though, like, this is rich coming from me, who even though I'm not getting the exclusive the what's it called, the digital, not the digital, the collector's edition of the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, like with the Sephiroth statue, I do support it. I think it's a great idea and I think it's awesome. But at the same time, I think they have to be careful to not oversell these big characters. Like, I don't know if someone if one of you or any one of you has played World of Warcraft, like Wrath of the Lich King. Do you know how Arthas was such a big character, and how it kind of, I don't know, had a similar effect on the World of Warcraft community as Sephiroth has for Final Fantasy. I feel like Square Enix should never allow themselves to do the same thing that World of Warcraft did in Shadowlands, which is basically cheapening the iconic character, like the way they made him. Like the way they, sorry about the spoilers if you're playing through World of Warcraft or whatever, just skip 15 seconds ahead if you're watching this as a video. But or cover your ears if you're here. um, but um, but the way they kind of sold him at the end of the raid as a wisp, and completely cheapened the character. I really hated that. Bro, welcome back. What's up? That classic 2000 site. It's kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like the vibe that we miss, right? However, with Square Enix, you can never know if these websites and previews are the current versions or their past versions. Because if you go to the Mog Station website, honestly, when I go to a Square Enix website, I'm still getting this exact same vibe. I don't know if it's a Japanese thing or what it is, but a lot of their websites still look very, very, very retro.
This saw Sephiroth revealed as one of the characters who would feature within the movie, and he would be positioned alongside Cloud in
This is a
most
cool
of the
poster,
promotional
though.
materials. Action figures were even revealed to be in production, and this led fans to believe the role of Sephiroth would be quite pivotal. They weren't wrong. When Sephiroth arrived, it was pure spectacle, the ultimate fantastical showdown of strength, power, and extraterrestrial abilities that fans had been craving. But it was missing some key components, as there was no real narrative mystery or uncomfortable foreshadowing. Sephiroth was mentioned as the film progressed, as it was surmised that he was the architect of Geostigma. It was also floated that he might still be alive. But whereas in Final Fantasy VII the raw power and threat of Sephiroth was alluded to through extreme acts of violence, here it was shown through a plague that debilitated children and made them cough. There was no real foreshadowing, and what we saw of Sephiroth during the final showdown left nothing to the imagination. It was the
They
ultimate
delivered.
Sephiroth fantasy, and it's hard to call the depiction anything other than pure fan service. In this
It was
regard,
amazing.
the depiction of Sephiroth had shifted, and it had shifted to match what the writers thought fans wanted to see. Nomura spoke of Cloud going through a similar transformation. The writers actively adjusted Cloud's personality to be more sulky and sullen in Advent Children, as in spite of them, as the scenario writers, not seeing Cloud that way based on how he was written and represented in Final Fantasy VII.
Like, I think that it is kind of wrong to call Cloud weak. Like, we have to keep in mind at all times that Cloud is deeply, deeply, deeply traumatized. it's like, yeah, he might seem, moody or sulky or whatever, but he's traumatized and at the same time has no idea whatsoever why he's traumatized. It's like he has like an itch that he wants to scratch, but he doesn't know where to scratch himself, and it's driving him crazy. How awful would that be to just walk around with an itch at all times, but whenever you scratch yourself or try to scratch yourself and just kind of soothe the itch, you you're not satisfied because that's not the place. The place is like all over. The place is literally under your skin. Like calling him weak is like, dude, like that would drive anyone crazy.
It's how the fan base had come to see his personality. And based on this, they chose to just lean into it
Exactly. He thought he
and
was
give the
someone
fans what they
else.
wanted. Each subsequent property relating to the compilation of Final Fantasy VII would then be used to show different sides of Sephiroth, so as to provide additional context for his character. But part of what made Sephiroth so devilish was that there was limited backstory aligned to the character. The only time we got to see the non-villainous
Sorry
form of
about that.
Sephiroth was during the Nibelheim flashback. But as Soldier had been vilified throughout the narrative as a force of evil, even though Sephiroth was more normal, he was still nowhere near positioned as being a good guy. Instead, he was a
More
bad guy
normal.
who became even more bad. The compilation was designed to change this perception. Whereas Advent Children presented Sephiroth as an all-knowing and superior demigod with no flaws, through Before Crisis and Crisis Core, a concerted effort was
Yeah, he definitely had, like, you can tell that he's had different representations throughout these different like games, movies, and whatnot. And I think it's up to you as, as a lore enjoyer to kind of, I guess, choose what you want to resonate with. If you want to see him as a bad guy, if you want to see him as misunderstood or whatever.
placed around ensuring we got to better understand Sephiroth as a character. In Before Crisis, this saw Elfei ask Sephiroth his reason for fighting, something he had never in all his years thought about before. And in Crisis Core, we got to see Sephiroth forge friendships with his fellow first-class colleagues and show genuine concern when they were injured. Through these scenarios, we got to see an attempt to humanize Sephiroth, and this would turn him from being seen as a relentless, unrelatable maniac that couldn't be reasoned or bargained with, into a sympathetic antagonist whose actions could be justified. He just needed a hug, some friends, and a connection to
Right.
his real mother.
It's like he radiates this I can fix him energy.
It was again clear, though, that fans resonated with this. The response to Crisis Core was overwhelmingly positive, and it became one of the
Because it was
best-selling games on the
perfect.
PlayStation Portable. In the years that followed, Sephiroth would continue to resonate with those who picked up and played Final Fantasy VII for the first time, and those who gained further exposure through the compilation. Once the Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced, questions were then asked as to how Sephiroth would be represented, especially as the decision had been made to split the original game into
I don't know. Like, I think, in my opinion, comparing like Voldemort and Sephiroth, like I can see where you're coming from, but I think though is that Sephiroth was just a giant introvert who basically chose to operate alone. I mean, yes, he had like the copies and whatnot, but those were never like real friends. They were like means to an end. Whereas Voldemort is not as much of an introvert, at least later on, as you'd think, because even though he could choose to kind of distance himself and not go to these board meetings with his Death Eaters and whatnot, and like not work closely with them and around them and instill fear like at all times. He could have just been, out there and had someone, represent him or whatever. He still kind of chose to be a part of the gang, in my opinion. Like, he would be there, he would like make sure that they're loyal to him, would talk to them, would like, punish them and whatnot. It's like I think he actually just kind of really wanted that gang, whereas I think Sephiroth just was very yeah, was very happy to just operate alone and create his helpers, should he need them.
multiple parts. After it was announced that the first part would be focused exclusively on Midgar, there was an assumption that Sephiroth would not feature, as he didn't really feature during that segment of the original game. However, due to how synonymous Sephiroth
No, Sephiroth had to be there in the remake. Even though he hadn't been featured at that point, let's face it, everybody who's played remake, they played it, and everybody anticipated seeing Sephiroth at some point. We did see Sephiroth in Midgar, I think, when Cloud was when there was that fire and he had this vision or whatever. And it's like, yes, you see him through a vision, but you don't want this to be a vision because you know it's a vision. You just kind of want to see him.
Was with Final Fantasy VII, the developers felt there would be an assumption from players who hadn't played Final Fantasy VII that Sephiroth should appear within that initial installment, and that if he didn't, it would just lead to confusion. This notion was at odds with the original portrayal of Sephiroth.
Even in the original game, you don't encounter Sephiroth until a bit later. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think there's a long while for you to play in the original game until you actually get to see Sephiroth. You hear about him, but you never get to see him, and that's actually, this video kind of opened my eyes to like this whole like psychological thing that they did with not showing Sephiroth at first and then just kind of like building that tension. I think that's pretty brilliant.
Sephiroth, but the developers decided to scrap the connection with Jaws, making Sephiroth a focal point from the get-go. This became a
And both somehow worked out. Final Fantasy VII Original, the system worked out, this also worked out, but I think with remake it was like a different thing because we already knew Sephiroth and the fans have already expected him to show up, and it was like a giant fan service thing, which I think it worked out, and this was probably the only way it could.
apparent during the E3 2019 re-reveal, as Sephiroth featured towards the end of the trailer. And he would continue to appear as promotion ramped up, with them even showing a recreation of the famous scene of him walking through the flames.
Beautiful.
The final game would then feature a significant number of scenes that related to the iconic villain, and he was installed as the final boss of the first part. This was a huge breakaway from the original, but the threat of Sephiroth did still loom large. It just loomed in a very different way, and the notion of mystery was reintroduced, as we are still none the wiser as to Sephiroth's overriding objective. As we then build to the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it's already been made clear that the role of Sephiroth will continue to grow and expand. It's already been confirmed that he will appear as a playable party member throughout the Nibelheim incident, and there will no doubt be even more narrative content to enjoy. This notion has been further expanded upon via Ever Crisis. Sephiroth has been a central focus throughout much of its marketing, with a huge amount of weight placed on the game delivering even more backstory around the character. And with Ever Crisis, it's further emphasized that Sephiroth, the main antagonist from the original game, has become one of the primary motivations and promotional tools that Square Enix can leverage to encourage people to play games related to the expanded Final Fantasy VII universe. And this in itself is actually kind of surreal. It's hard to think of another
Right.
video game franchise where the role of a character has changed so much over time, nor one where so much emphasis is placed on the villain.
Because Final Fantasy VII fans will be incredibly forgiving when it comes to Sephiroth appearing in games. For as long as Sephiroth appears in some way, shape, or form, I think, regardless of the fact that his idea is changing a little bit or whatever, people are going to, I think, forgive the changes because everybody just wants a little bit of that Sephiroth on screen, you know?
In a way, it's similar to how the Joker has grown in comparison to Batman. For
Right?
many years, the Joker appeared as the
That's a good
perfect foil to
comparison.
Batman, and when they did, it often resulted in magic. But in 2019, due to how much interest there was around
Well,
the Joker,
we're also forgetting that yes, the idea changes over time, but we're forgetting that there's also like changes within the, you know, basically the companies and the writing teams and the development and whatnot. And nobody likes to think about that. Everybody, like, the fans like to imagine Sephiroth as if he's actually real because that's a part of the fantasy as you're playing an RPG game. And you don't want to be thinking about how, I don't know, a developer or a writer or whatever got sacked or left or whatever. For That's the reason why things change. Those things actually became really apparent in World of Warcraft, for example, with the whole story with Metzen and whatnot. But fans, until they have to, until the writing gets so bad or so weird or so different, they don't think about, the people writing these characters. They think about the characters. And I think the moment you start thinking about the writers or the developers or whatever as people who are creating your content, the magic just kind of disappears in a way. That's the point where your fantasy has broken, and now you're thinking about them as characters who someone writes, and not as, characters that are a part of your fantasy. And changes in the audience as well. Like, you have to be following like your audience while acquiring the new audience, which is sometimes very difficult. Like the balance between acquisition and retention is actually just crazy, because you want to attract new people who are not familiar with the game yet, who live in these modern times, and at the same time you want to satisfy the audience who just want that nostalgia. They just want things to remain the same, and those two clashing into each other is never an easy thing to resolve. Player from WoW Wrath of Lich King might have a different lifestyle today. Exactly, exactly. It's like, what do you want to do? Do you want to create a game that will cater to the people who want to feel this nostalgia forever? Or do you want to cater to new people who are just joining the game and who want the new game to be as friendly as possible? Or do you want to cater your old audience in a way that you're considering how they're no longer in high school, but instead they have their families or their jobs or whatever, and you want to make the game just more accessible to them? It's like, what do you even do? It's just such a hard thing to balance.
Joker, it saw DC branch out and create a standalone film that had nothing to do with Batman, and that movie ended up grossing over $1 billion at the box office.
That movie is
Based on how
awesome.
things are going, it feels like the next logical step would therefore be to create a game where Sephiroth is positioned as the primary playable character and protagonist
I
of
really
that
want to
particular
play this
story,
game.
and Cloud is nothing to do with it. This would complete the transformative arc that he appears to be on, and it would allow Square Enix to truly see through Yuichi Wada's initial plan of maximizing their assets by giving fans exactly what they want. But for now, we will have to wait and see how Ever Crisis develops and expands the backstory of Sephiroth, and how new narratives are forged when Rebirth launches next year. Either way, we're curious to hear about how you feel about the way in which Sephiroth's role has changed over time. Are you happy with there being so much focus placed on his role these days? Or would you prefer it reverted back to there being much less focus on Sephiroth? Let us know
Okay, so when it comes to that, I think that
in the comments below.
yeah, make sure
Please
to
hit that like
subscribe to
button
Final
and
Fantasy
subscribe to the channel.
Union. They are very, very, very good, and make amazing Final Fantasy videos. So make sure to give them a sub. So when it comes to this, I think it's very important to realize that the cat is out of the bag. You know what I mean? It's like, at some point you can't go back to showing less, because like at this point you've already shown so much of, the content that directly kind of relates to Sephiroth, and you've shown so many different aspects that, like, taking him away from the game would just kind of be weird. More character details is always welcome. I mean, yeah, like, I think that the lore should definitely be um built upon, and I think that that is what we at this point kind of expect to see. We don't expect to see, less of Sephiroth or whatever, just because we're trying to, like, relive this nostalgia of, like, basically him being, I don't know, a mystery or whatever. The cat is fully out of the bag, and Sephiroth is no longer a mystery. And I think that is just very, very important to note. This was a very good video. Again, make sure to subscribe to Final Fantasy Union if you haven't yet. They do these amazing, amazing lore coverages, and this was a very good one. I'm not sure who recommended me the video, but thank you for that.